What is up guys, Blue Spooky here with another 2-hour Megamix. If you guys are enjoying these daily uploads and these longer 2-hour videos, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying this one. If we could aim for 1,500 likes on these longer videos, that would be a good milestone to aim for. It all helps the channel to grow and the videos to do well, to ensure I can keep doing these for a long time to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in this video, please be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below, as my favorite part about doing these is reading your guys' thoughts. Without further ado, I will let you enjoy the next 2 hours or so of true scary stories, and I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you again at the end of the video. I'm a male, and this happened roughly 2 years ago. I was selling my old phone on Craigslist after having gotten a new one. There was nothing wrong with the old phone per se. It was just 2 years old, and I figured there would be a good market for it, so I listed it on Craigslist. I was debating between eBay, Facebook Marketplace, or Craigslist, and obviously I ended up choosing Craigslist in the end. The price I was asking was pretty good. I didn't care about making too much money off of it. I just wanted to sell the phone fast. After posting it, I think within a few hours or so, I got a text message regarding that phone. Somebody told me they were interested in buying it, so I responded to them and told them it was available. They could buy it as soon as they wanted. After texting back and forth a while longer, I gathered that this was a woman whose name was Molly. We arranged to meet up the following day outside of a local strip mall. It was, I think, located roughly halfway between us both, so it was a pretty good meeting place. The next day, I took my phone and drove to that location to sell it. When I got there, everything went as planned. Molly showed up and bought the phone from me, and we went our separate ways. The entire encounter seemed perfectly normal, although we didn't talk a whole lot. Molly didn't exhibit any strange behaviors or anything I might take as a warning sign at all. Over the next few days, things were pretty fine, but Molly began to start texting me. She told me to come over and even asked if she could come to my place. This came relatively out of nowhere. In fact, at first I thought she may have the wrong number. That is, until I saw her mention me by name. I mean, we weren't exactly hanging out here. I was just selling her my old phone. That was the only time I'd ever seen her. I also did not happen to be interested in her, but even if I was, this was not exactly the way to go about it. She sent 4 or 5 messages within an hour of each other late one night. I thought maybe she was drunk. That might explain her behavior. She texted me the following morning as well, though, once again saying she wanted to come over and hang out. I told her I already had a girlfriend. I didn't, but I just wanted her to leave me alone. She said that didn't matter to her, and continued to message me as if we were best friends or something. She would randomly ask me what was up or what I was doing. I was very confused by all of this. When it continued for several more days, I asked her to please stop contacting me. Of course, she did not. She became irate and began cursing me out and stuff. At that point, I blocked her. I thought that would be it. Even that was a crazy enough story. I mean, I guess you never really know what could happen when you use Craigslist. Thing is, though, that very same night, Molly suddenly showed up at my house. I remember suddenly hearing a knock at my front door. During this time, I lived alone in a small home that I rented out. When I looked out the front window, I saw Molly standing right there. I couldn't believe it. I mean, how did she even know where I lived? I had deleted all the information off my own phone. Had she followed me home or something? I answered the door just to tell her to leave me alone. When I opened up, though, she instantly started cursing me out. I told her to leave, but she stormed forward as if to enter my home. At that point, I slammed the door shut on her. I locked it, but she began trying to force it open. After that, she seemingly ran away. Or at least I saw her running away off the front step. I assumed she was going to leave. That was wrong, though. About 30 seconds to a minute later, I heard a noise at one of the back windows. It was a loud banging noise, and I knew instantly it was her. I called the police and sat inside. I waited for them to arrive. She was attacking the window. Then she went over and tried to open the back door to the home. At some point, I opened a window slightly that was a distance away and warned her that I had called the police. She didn't seem to care, though. She stayed there, moving from window to window and door to door, banging on them and trying to open them all. When the police showed up, they were finally able to stop her. I ended up having to get a restraining order against her. I honestly have no idea why she wouldn't leave me alone and became so obsessed with me. I suspect some sort of substance abuse, but who knows? That's taught me to be a lot more careful when using things like Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. In 1987, I was 12 years old. I grew up in a third world country in Africa. I remember the outside of my village. There were these massive rock formations that me and my friends would often play on. One of our favorite games was hide and seek. One day, all of the children got together and planned on having the biggest hide and seek game we had ever played. Myself and two others had been selected as the seekers. We would count to 50 in an alley behind the marketplace and then go search for the hiders. After about 15 minutes of searching, we didn't find anyone. We were confused because it was an unspoken rule that you could only hide within the rock formations. We decided to look through the marketplace and the rest of the village. Still nothing. That was when one of us noticed something in the distance. For some context, beyond the cluster of rocks was a desert that expanded for miles. We could see these unmoving figures on the horizon. The best way to describe them is that they looked like scarecrows, small scarecrows hoisted onto pikes sticking out of the ground. We ran back to our village screaming. Everything else is a blur to me. I only remember certain parts. Chaos broke out in the village. Our huts were burned to the ground, and my father threw me onto a truck before he was gunned down in front of me. Nearly everyone I knew died that day. My name is Samuel O'Brien, and I'm originally from Somalia. What happened to my people is often referred as the Isaac genocide. This happened on Halloween night in 2019. Me and three of my friends, Dennis, Eddie, and Adam, were out doing what most 14-year-olds would do on Halloween: get as much candy as possible. Afterward, we hung out at the bowling alley and played a few games there. I was the one in the group who stuck out like a sore thumb. Eddie and Adam were dressed in all black, donning skeleton masks. Dennis was wearing a latex Michael Jackson mask. However, I was wearing a bright red and black Spider-Man costume. This will be important later on, so keep it in mind. After we bowled a few games, we decided to go to another nearby neighborhood to prank a couple of people. Not anything dangerous, mind you. We would just knock on their door and scare them or whatever. However, when we approached the first house, this is where things took a turn for the worst. We rang the doorbell and waited for an answer. All of my friends were in the front yard, waiting to jump out. I was crouched below the fence by the pathway that led to the street. That was when a car pulled up across from me with its windows down. I noticed two men in the vehicle. One was a skinny guy, and the other was a much larger and more intimidating man. Not wanting to give the impression I was up to no good, I gave them a friendly smile and waved to them before putting my mask on. Moments later, nobody had answered the door, and the car was still idling across the road. We decided to go elsewhere. We made our way further up the street and noticed that the car had started moving again, keeping pace with us but maintaining a certain distance. At this point, Dennis, Eddie, and Adam had caught on to the fact that something was wrong. We turned into a dark alley that went uphill. There was no lighting there, so it was pitch black. About halfway up, we looked behind us to see if we were still being followed by these men. What we saw sent a sharp feeling of dread up my spine. The larger man was now marching up the alley towards us. We took off down the alley and made it to the other side. We started to run down the hill and into another neighborhood to avoid these men. This is where I realized that the shoes I had on were awful. It was basically just a rubber sole with nothing on the inside to secure my foot in place, so it would slip out of the shoe with every step, making running impossible. We tried everything. I even tried to piggyback off one of my friends, which proved useless despite me being the skinniest. I had no choice but to hop my way down the street. Meanwhile, the large man had reached the end of the alley. He crossed the street and waited. Soon the car came around the corner and pulled up. He jumped in. We were just about to turn the corner when the car came speeding onto the path in front of us, nearly running me over. This is where I decided to stay where I was with my hands raised above my head. The others took off without me. I don't blame them. It was a fight-or-flight situation. I had pretty much just accepted that I was likely going to be murdered. The large man got out of the car and started yelling, "Get your fucking friends back here right now!" The skinny guy in the car had already caught up with them. They eventually let us go. It turns out they thought we were a different group of kids that apparently had been throwing eggs at their car. Me and my friends retreated back to the bowling alley and called our parents to come pick us up. That was enough for the night. We were thoroughly terrified about being hunted down by a couple of creepy-ass guys. While we were waiting for them, we saw that exact same car pass us by again 3 more times, and even after me, Dennis, and Adam had left, Eddie called us to say that they had followed him around for a while longer. Something that still bothers me about this whole situation is that I don't know how they could have possibly mistaken us for another group of kids. I was wearing bright red spandex, for crying out loud. I doubt whoever they were pursuing that night had been wearing something similar. Also, the fact that they continued to encircle us after the initial encounter makes me really question what they were up to. I believe that we all narrowly escaped a gruesome fate on that Halloween night. I heard this from my aunt. She worked in a hospital her whole career, and as you can imagine, she has seen and experienced quite a lot. One night, my aunt told me about when she first became a nurse. She said that the hardest part of her job was always the night shift. The way she described her job and duties made it sound like she was incredibly busy. She had to make regular rounds all throughout the night and respond to patients and any sudden changes in their condition. She just found it hard to adjust to the night shift since her body was used to sleeping. While there, she would be working. On top of that, she was largely alone in the dark hospital at night. It was very creepy. She felt like this was a new nurse thing, though, and figured that she would adjust eventually. One night, she was making her rounds along the dark hospital ward. She would look in on the patients as she passed by to see how they were doing. When she arrived at one room on the 3rd floor, she noticed a patient sitting upright, staring blankly at the window. The patient was an elderly man in his 80s. The elderly man noticed that my aunt was standing in the doorway of his room watching him. He called out to her, "Isn't Nozaki on night duty tonight?" He never turned away from looking out the window, but since it was dark, my aunt could see his face in the reflection. He seemed to be grinning. My aunt encouraged him to lie back down in bed and get some rest. That wasn't the first time she'd heard someone say that since she started working the night shift. She had heard many patients talking about this Nozaki-san. When someone mentioned Nozaki-san, it was usually to say something positive. She remembered one patient had even said they were much better than her at her job. My aunt wasn't the type to develop professional jealousy. She's very placid and patient, but due to the patients constantly referencing this other doctor or nurse, she decided to make an effort to find out more about them. She looked through the logs and registers, but couldn't find this Nozaki-san anywhere. On the sign-in sheets the doctors and nurses were supposed to sign, there was no sign of them. As far as she knew, there was no one supposed to be working on her ward by that name either. Since she was still relatively new to her role, though, she guessed there must have been some senior doctor or nurse working at the ward that she hadn't met yet. She didn't think much of it. After making sure the elderly man was lying back down in his bed, she returned to the nurse's station. A senior nurse was there, and she and my aunt entered into some casual conversation. My aunt used that opportunity to bring up the enigmatic Nozaki-san. She said the senior nurse froze up for a couple of seconds. You could have heard a pin drop in that ward. She then turned to look at my aunt with a very troubled look on her face. Well, it's interesting that you mention Nozaki-san. You see, she used to work here until about a year ago when she took her own life. This kind of thing comes up every once in a while for some reason. My aunt was floored by that. She said it chilled her to the core. She hoped it was some kind of mistake. Perhaps the nurse had misheard her or something. My aunt brought up the conversation she'd had with the elderly man. The nurse told her that had been happening a lot lately. My aunt was surprised by this flippant and curt response. The nurse apparently had a stony expression as she said it. My aunt never forgot that exchange, and ever since that night she continued to hear mentions of this Nozaki-san on the ward, especially during the night shift. It wasn't just the elderly man, but also young male patients and even children. Every time she heard that name, she felt uneasy. These patients were all talking about someone who was no longer here, as if they were currently working at the hospital right now. It didn't feel right. It was almost as if she had never left. My aunt considered quitting her job because she was so creeped out by what was happening. Instead of quitting, though, she grew into her role and adapted to life in the ward. Soon, that uneasy feeling and fear that she felt started to fade. When she heard them talking about Nozaki-san on the ward, she didn't get as creeped out as she used to. She'd just think to herself, here we go again. She wondered if maybe since she had been a senior nurse who used to work at the wards, maybe her spirit was still present to watch over her patients. Maybe it didn't need to be something creepy. She tried to think of it as a positive thing. As I was listening to the story my aunt was telling me, I thought that was a pretty nice story. Maybe all ghosts aren't really all that bad. I was smiling as my aunt continued. Then she said something that really disturbed me. Yeah, I was smiling like that too when I came to that realization. But then I found out something pretty disturbing. Turned out all the patients who asked me about Nozaki-san, or if she was working that night, would all pass away a couple of days later. It seems as if seeing her or talking about her was an incredibly bad omen, a signal that the end was coming. I don't know. There seems something about that seems so sinister, like this ghost was the hospital's grim reaper. This all started way back when I was an elementary school student. I would catch the bus to school every morning back then. This wasn't a school bus, by the way. It was just a regular transit bus. One day, I noticed a person that looked incredibly out of place. So much so that it truly shocked me that this person was on the bus. At a first glance, I thought this mysterious passenger may have been a homeless person who'd gotten on board. I saw them first as their back faced me from behind. I remember that they were wearing a big, filthy-looking trench coat and had a paper bag and an umbrella which looked like it had several holes in it. I thought that the person was a woman, largely based on the length of the hair of this individual. Her hair was set in a rock-solid fashion, as if she had hairsprayed it all from the front of her head all the way down her back. It was a very unusual look. I thought it better not to stare, though, as I'd always been told it was impolite to stare. This woman kind of made it hard. She really stood out from the crowd. I decided to look back and see if my older sister, who was a few years older than me and obviously didn't want to sit with me on the bus, had noticed her as well. My sister caught my glance and looked at me with a mock look of disgust on her face, so I knew that she had noticed the person as well. Most of the other people around us didn't seem to be aware of that strange woman, though. The atmosphere on the bus was as if she didn't stand out at all, the exact same as usual. I had never seen the woman before, so it was quite strange. When we got off at the bus stop at our stop and made it home, me and my sister told our mom about the strange person we saw on the bus. We even gave her a nickname, the Hair Woman. My mom, of course, wasn't that interested in what we were telling her. Now, I know you're probably thinking, wow, great story. You saw a woman on the bus who looked a little strange when you were a kid. Well, if that were the only part of the story, you would be right. But what if I told you that that wasn't the only time I saw that woman? It's been 20 years since I had that first encounter on the bus, but I see that woman everywhere. She has this incredible ability to somehow always be around me and appear without me having detected her. I always end up finding her, but I can never piece together how she arrived at wherever I am. The first time I saw her was in our rural village in Tohoku. The second time was in the Kanto region. Then I began to see her in other places, and I even saw her tonight. I'm currently in the Chubu region. It's without a doubt the same person each time. I mean, you really can't miss her. She's always dressed the exact same, and I'm pretty certain there aren't more than 3 of her up and down the country. I just don't get why she's following me around. It really does play on my mind. When I saw her tonight, she was walking in the rain. She had that same tattered umbrella I saw when I was a kid, but she didn't even try to use it. Why not? I often find myself asking questions like that whenever I'm not concentrating on something. The strangest thing is that I've gotten so used to her following me around that I don't even get scared when I see her anymore. She hasn't ever tried to do anything to me necessarily. I don't feel anything other than, oh, there she is again. I don't really get shocked, but I definitely notice her. Honestly, it sometimes kind of drives me crazy. I don't get why she always dresses the same, whether it's midsummer, midday, middle of the rain, downtown, or in a rural area. She always has the same items on her as well. If it weren't for the fact that I know other people have seen her, I might have almost wondered if I was going crazy or had a mental illness, or if it was a hallucination or something. Sometimes I feel like I'm talking about a dream, or something like this man. You remember that thing? If anyone else out there has had a similar experience with this person, please tell me. I wonder if maybe I should try and interact with her and see why the hell she's following me all over the place. I don't know, though. A friend of mine who I'll call Josh and a couple of our friends went to a Halloween party on October 30th of 2018. We all decided to go as characters from the Purge movies. We all had on these smiling LED masks. Josh's was the only mask that had a green light. That will come into play later. There were 5 of us, and we all indulged in a little alcohol. Josh got so wasted that he couldn't even stand up. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning when we decided to call it quits. I had the car and was the only one out of the group who hadn't drunk as much as the others. Therefore, it fell on me to drive everyone else home. I had to walk Josh to his front door because he fell on his ass as soon as he got out of the car. After he got inside and closed the door, I dropped the rest of my friends off and went home. It was around 5 a.m. when I was awoken by my phone ringing. I looked up at my phone to see that it was Josh calling me. I rubbed the sleep from my eyes and answered, hello? Hey, I think there's someone in my house. Josh's voice was extremely hushed and panicked. My heart dropped. He went on to say he could hear footsteps in his living room and had gotten up to see what it was. He then heard someone rush out the side door. He was now hiding behind his bed, with the door to his room locked. I couldn't believe I was hearing this. Josh lived in a pretty big house in a very safe neighborhood. I never believed anyone would have the balls to break in. Dude, you need to call the cops, I told him. That should have been his very first call. I remembered, though, that he was still heavily intoxicated, so he probably had no idea what to do. He called the police from his house phone, and I stayed on the line with him until they showed up. The cops found footprints on his carpet, and the side door was wide open. He was so drunk that he must have forgotten to lock it. Of course, there was no sign of the intruder anywhere. The cops then told Josh to lock all of his doors and call back if anything else happened. It was now Halloween. I went over to Josh's house to help him pass out candy to the children. It was around 9 p.m. when the parents started telling their kids to come inside, mostly because it was a school night. We were packing everything up when we heard a tap on the window. The blinds were closed, but we could see a green light coming from the other side. I slowly approached the window and opened the blinds, and what I saw terrified me. Standing on the other side was a man brandishing a knife, but most disturbing of all, he was wearing the very same LED Purge mask that Josh had on the night before. The man let loose a horrifying laugh before he started banging on the window like a lunatic. We just stood there in total shock. Eventually, we ran out of the room and grabbed the phone to dial 911. We then heard someone screaming from outside. I'm guessing a passerby saw the man at the window and got startled. The man then took off. When the cops arrived, the only description we could give them was that he was wearing the green light-up Purge mask. As far as I know, the guy was never caught. The moral of this story is that you should make sure your doors are locked at night, because sometimes Halloween brings out the crazies. For a little bit of background to this story, I live in a quiet neighborhood. It's not quite in the middle of nowhere. We have neighbors, but everyone has a little bit more land. I would say that most properties are about 2 to 3 acres large. I live with my wife, but when this took place, she was out of town with her best friend on a trip. I remember I had just finished mowing the lawn when I saw I got a text from a new number on my phone. I had no idea as to who this could be. The text said the person was from Craigslist, and they wanted to know if they could come over now. I have never used Craigslist before in my life, and I was pretty sure my wife hadn't either. I texted back saying it was the wrong number, and that I'd never used Craigslist. Within a short time, I got a response, which was my exact address. The person said, "This is you, right?" I was really creeped out when I read it. I didn't know how to respond. I called my wife and asked her if she had any idea what this could be about, but she didn't know either. I just didn't respond to the number, hoping maybe it was a joke or something. Several hours went by, and I received another text from this number. This time, the text said, "So can I come over or what?" I responded by saying no, don't come over. I don't have anything for sale. I did not get a response for a while, not until about 10 o'clock that night. There was another message from the same number saying, "I'm here." This one really creeped me out. I texted back asking who this was. The response was yet again that they were from Craigslist, which really confused me even more. I guessed it was time to see if this guy was all talk or if he'd actually showed up. I moved out into the living room and looked out my front window. The neighborhood typically gets very dark at night and does not have streetlights, so I couldn't really see much. I didn't notice any cars in my driveway or on the road or anything. I went over and sat back down on the couch in the family room, where I had been. That room was just away off the living room, probably about 10 seconds or so. After sitting down, I got another text. It said, "Check out the front window." I got up and walked into the living room. As soon as I stepped into it, I saw a man standing right outside the living room window. He was staring at me with these wide eyes. It was one of the strangest things I've ever seen. I didn't recognize this guy at all. I called the police right then and there. The guy kept standing there for the next minute or so, not moving at all. Just as suddenly as he'd appeared, though, he turned off and ran sprinting out of my sight. The cops came out and searched all around, but the guy had already run away. He was long gone. I blocked the number and checked out the front window several more times after the police left. The man didn't come back, thankfully, and I haven't seen or heard from him since. It's still a big mystery to me, though. How did he even get my address, and who exactly was he? I really have no idea. When I was 16, I frequently snuck out and explored abandoned buildings in my area. I would often do dumb teenager stuff with my two friends Aaron and Tristan. We lived in a small town in Ireland, and on this particular night, it was around 10 o'clock or so. We had just finished up a 2-hour gaming session on Call of Duty, and made some plans to go explore an abandoned gas station that we had recently discovered earlier that week. We arrived at the desolate old gas station, which was located down an overgrown road that was so old there weren't even any streetlights on it at all. While we were walking up to this old building, Tristan saw a car sitting at the far end of the parking lot. It was an old gray Nissan. We wondered how it could have even made it through the overgrown road to get there. Tristan seemed on edge and asked if we should just leave right now. Aaron teased him about being a little bitch, and I played along. Deep down, though, I did feel that car was a bit sketchy. We went over to inspect this old Nissan. It appeared to be in surprisingly good condition. Looking back, that should have been our first red flag. We then made our way to the gas station. The front door and all the windows on the first and second floors were all boarded up, so we did a full 360 around the place. We found that the back door had an old cheap lock keeping it closed. Aaron picked up a discarded fence post and hit the lock until it broke. As Aaron pushed open the door, a jingling sound echoed throughout the store. We all jumped back in surprise, but soon realized it was one of those belt chains that go off when a door opens. We stepped inside and began poking around inside of this structure. It was quite underwhelming, actually. There were random debris lying here and there, and some old shelves that must have once been used for inventory. We saw all there was to see on the first floor, so we made our way upstairs. It was just one large office room with chairs, desks, and a large table that sat in the center of the room. Aaron took out 3 bottles of beer from his bag, and that's when we really started to loosen up. We pulled some of the chairs together, and after a little bit of drinking, our laughter was cut short. At first, we thought we were hearing police sirens, but then we realized it was the alarm of the Nissan parked outside. I looked through a large hole in one of the boarded windows to see a bald man standing beside the car. I dropped my bottle on the ground in surprise. The bottle smashed against the floor, and the man immediately turned his attention to the windows. We dropped to the ground and hid under the large table. We waited for what felt like an hour until the alarm finally stopped. That's when we all heard the bells downstairs, jingling as the door creaked open. I felt like my heart was going to burst out of my chest. We heard the man call out to us, "I know you're in here!" He then started shouting threats, saying we'd made a big mistake coming here and vandalizing his car. This obviously confused us, because we didn't do anything to his car whatsoever. We then heard the man's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs to our hiding spot. I got a good look at the man as he emerged from the doorway. He was very large and looked like he could easily take on the three of us. He started scanning the room, and I remember him calling out in a disturbing voice, come out, wherever you are. I'm going to find you." The man began approaching the back of the table. Aaron then did something that caught everyone off guard. He leapt out from under the table and smashed his beer bottle over the man's head in a surprise attack. That caused him to immediately collapse upon the floor. As he toppled over, a large knife fell out of his hand. We ran as fast as we could out of that place, hearing heavy footsteps coming down the stairs shortly after. We ran into the surrounding forest and made our way through the trees until we got back to my home. I never felt more grateful to be alive. It's been 2 years since that night, and I still don't know what would have happened if that unhinged man had caught us. I don't ever want to know. In the late fall of 2017, I had just moved back into my hometown of Las Vegas after spending a year teaching set design at UT Austin. It had been a very rewarding experience, but hadn't left much time for socializing. By the time I got back home to Vegas, it had been exactly 26 months since I'd so much as held the guy's hand. I was fine not dating in Austin. It was a temporary stay after all, and I quite literally had a job to do. Aside from a few casual flirtations, I remained professional and stayed focused on my work. Not long after arriving back in Vegas, though, I started to feel the pangs of loneliness setting in. Once I mentioned that to a friend of mine, she recommended I download Tinder. I downloaded the app and made myself a profile. Within just a few days, I had a date lined up with a guy I actually really liked. He's a guy we'll call Mark. He seemed to occupy the happy medium between quite attractive and somewhat nerdy, and since he was the perfect gentleman on our first date, he made it very easy to accept an invitation to a second one. One thing led to another, and we ended up dating for a couple of months. When the time seemed right, he asked me to officially be his girlfriend. I happily accepted. On the surface, this might all seem totally normal, right? Girl meets boy, girl dates boy, becomes girlfriend. Where's the creepy or scary part? Well, by the time Mark asked me to be his girlfriend, we had kissed a grand total of 5 or 6 times. There had been no making out, no heavy petting, and most certainly no sleeping together. At first, I just thought he was being gentlemanly and shy. I'd never been that great at asking to be intimate, so it seemed like an unstoppable force meets an immovable object situation. Neither of us was really going to make the first move. In the end, it was me that brought it up first, though. It was the very same weekend he asked me to be his girlfriend. I decided to bring up the possibility of us being intimate together in the near future. I communicated to him that it was something I wanted, and made sure that it was something he wanted too. When I asked if there was anything he'd like me to do, he seemed to think for a moment, then hesitated when he tried to speak his mind. I asked him to finish his thoughts, and made it clear that he was in a safe space with me, completely judgment-free. He once again attempted to say what he wanted to say, but seemed to fall at the final hurdle, not actually airing his thoughts. I recognized that whatever it was evidently something he wasn't 100% comfortable speaking out loud. I also thought he'd open up a bit more and act in the heat of the moment once we finally made it to the bedroom, but then we didn't even make it to the bedroom. By then, I was starting to believe that he was deliberately avoiding any kind of physical intimacy at all. Obviously, that bothered me quite a bit. I really liked him and wanted him to like me, but if we weren't going to be intimate together, that would be a real big issue. Another week or two went by before I sat Mark down and told him we really needed to talk about this. Once again, he might as well have just turned to stone. He seemed either unwilling or unable to voice whatever he wanted to say. It took another round of encouragement to even try to get it out of him. After what seemed like an eternity, he told me what he wanted. And what he wanted was for me to dress up for him. Before I tell you what Mark wanted me to dress up as, though, there's something you need to know about me. Honestly, I know a lot of you will probably put 2 and 2 together by the time I finish explaining. I've always looked a lot younger than I really am. I guess when I hit 16, I just kind of stopped growing. It's not just that I'm short either. I'm 4'11" and have a baby face, the mother of all baby faces. That meant that even though I was in my late 20s at the time I was dating Mark, I could have easily passed for a high school freshman with no makeup on. It was a real problem around the time I started drinking. When I sat down with Mark the second time and finally got him to confess what he wanted me to dress up as, I realized there was another downside to looking as young as I did. I hadn't thought about it right up until that moment. I figured he'd want me to dress up as something cute, or maybe even do like a sexy cosplay or something. Mark didn't want that, though. When at long last the words finally left his lips, I was so horrified I must have visibly pulled away. Mark said he wanted me to dress up as a little girl, and when I asked him what exactly he meant by that, he said he wanted me to dress up like I was in elementary school. Those were the words he used. He really wanted me to dress up as a child. I was stunned. I thought he was going to ask me to wear stockings or something or go blindfolded. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't really know what to say. I didn't say anything, and my silence prompted him to immediately backpedal as he tried to explain away what he'd just said to me. Within that moment, I realized without a doubt why he had chosen me as his girlfriend. The fact that I looked no older than 17, like I said. I ran out of Mark's apartment. He kept trying to call me as I made my way home, and I remember putting my phone on airplane mode, feeling like I couldn't even see his name without wanting to throw up. Once I was home, I gathered my thoughts and sent him a text saying I was deleting his number and he should lose mine too. Any further attempts to reach out to me would be considered unwanted harassment. After that, his calls and texts stopped altogether. I was thankful I never heard from him again. I wish I could tell you I never allowed Mark a single second of my time from there on. As you can imagine, though, that's not true at all. I've thought about him quite a bit since then. I've told the story to quite a few people. Whenever the subject of child abuse or exploitation comes up in a movie or on the news, I can't help but think of Mark. I believe it's just a matter of time before I see his face on the news, having been arrested for one of the worst crimes I could possibly conceive. I'm a 29-year-old woman, and I live with my husband in a house. Our neighborhood is pretty standard for the most part, and this happened about 1.5 years ago or so. I worked pretty normal hours back then, but my husband's hours were far more random. On this night, I recall he was working late. It was sometime after 8 p.m., and I was in the living room. I was FaceTiming my sister and young nephew. The three of us were talking until her son had to go to bed. I hung up at that point. I recall happening to look out the front window and noticing a car pulling into our driveway. A couple of things immediately struck me as odd about this. For one, this car was obviously not my husband's vehicle, and he wasn't supposed to be home yet either. For two, all of the vehicle's lights were off as it entered the driveway. Now, our driveway is somewhat long and goes right up to the garage. The garage is out of sight of the home though, because it connects to it. So the car ended up slowly driving down and then just barely going out of my sight. I could hear it parking somewhere further along. I kept watching and was now listening as well, but I didn't hear anybody getting out or anything. I called my husband and let him know of this strange activity going on. I was hoping that it may be one of his friends or something, but he had no clue as to who this could be and said that he would leave work as soon as possible. After hanging up with him, I wasn't really sure what to do. I walked over to the dining room, which had a window that looked out to the backyard. It was very dark back there as well, but when I looked out, I saw what appeared to be a man walking out from behind the garage and into the backyard. When I saw this, I left the room and dialed 911. I told the operator my address and told them the best I could of the situation that was going on. I was told the police were on their way. After that, I was walking through the living room when I suddenly heard the sound of glass shattering. It sounded like the dining room window being smashed in. I ran the rest of the way to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I then moved into the bedroom closet and shut the door there as well. Now that I was there, I really couldn't hear too much. As several minutes passed by, I thought I was in the clear and the person must have left already, but then I began to hear footsteps approaching from the hallway. When that happened, all I could do was hold my breath. The man got closer and closer and didn't seem to go into any other rooms. It appeared he was honing in straight for the bedroom that I was in. He tried to open the door, which was locked. When it didn't open, there was a very loud bang at the doorway. The man was trying to break down the door, perhaps by hitting it with something or attacking it with his body. I wasn't too sure. After several more loud bangs, I began to hear police sirens in the distance. This caused the man to move away from the door and retreat back down the hallway. Within just a minute, police were out in front of the house. I didn't hear much more until I was sure the cops were there. I then left the bedroom and went out into the hallway. The police had found the man slipping out through the backyard, and luckily he had been caught. The man had in fact broken the glass to the dining room, but nothing else in the house had been messed up at all, other than that single window. I'm not really sure what the guy's plan was, but it's very clear that he was there for me, not to rob the place. I'm really grateful the police got there when they did. This story took place during my early childhood, so I'll share the events that I can recall. It's mostly bits and pieces, but there are some things I can remember in great detail. Some other things I can only vaguely recall. I'll do my best to piece things together without getting off track. I have 2 sisters and I'm the middle child. They also remember a majority of this as well. This happened back in mid-2003, and I believe I was 5 or 6 years old back then. My 2 sisters were about 4 and 7 respectively. My parents hired a babysitter. Her name was Julie, and she had been friends with my mom since high school. She actually lived with us for a while even. All I really remember about her was that she was very tall, very skinny, and had dark blonde hair that was always tied up. We lived in an apartment complex at the time, a place called Oats Creek. Julie babysat us while my parents worked, and she even ended up dating one of my dad's coworkers, which brought about more than a few jokes at my dad's job. Basically, she was the quintessential family friend. Not long after that, though, is when Julie really started to change. She started getting very impatient and rude, and even started being abusive to us, mostly targeting my sisters and not me. My older sister even once told me that Julie had possibly tried to kill her, apparently because she did something to piss her off. In response, she grabbed a bottle with green liquid inside of it and tried to force my sister to drink it all. She didn't know what exactly the substance was and couldn't go into great detail about the incident. I guess her memory isn't quite as good as mine. Julie began to get physically violent with us over the stupidest reasons, such as accidentally knocking something over or spilling a drink. We were kids, of course, so she only did this when my parents were at work. They had no idea she had become a lunatic. That was until our family cat attacked her. Julie had closed the door with my sister's hands still in the doorway. I can't remember if it was an accident or not. Of course, that hurt my little sister very badly, and she started crying out in pain. That's when our cat jumped on Julie's leg and began to attack her with claws. She was biting and swatting at her, with her tail puffed out and hissing. She basically snapped. My parents were in the other room and were surprised that suddenly our cat, who wouldn't even hurt a fly, was starting to attack Julie. They had suspected that she was a bit of a whack job, but she still continued to watch after us. This is where my memory gets a little hazy, as if my mind was trying to block something out. I remember one occurrence to this day, 18 years after the fact. In our room, my older sister had her own twin-sized bed. Me and my little sister shared a bunk bed on the other side of the room. I slept in the top bunk. Anyway, I remember one night my little sister woke me up because she couldn't sleep. She climbed up on the top bunk with me, and we started quietly talking. After a while, she said, "Hey, watch this. I can hang off the edge without falling." Of course, she fell to the ground and started crying. Julie just stormed into the room yelling and cursing. She grabbed one of my dad's belts and began to whip my sister, then picked her up and slammed her down on the bottom bunk and screamed at her to go back to sleep. Julie was so enraged she didn't even see me watching her. I was completely frozen in shock. I didn't know what to do. I can only clearly remember one time where she struck me physically. As I said earlier, for some reason she went after my two sisters mostly. I remember she'd done something bad to one of them, and I called her a bitch. She hit me across the face. She told my parents. My dad asked her what she did to set me off. She got pissed with him and said I was being a disrespectful little shit. Not long after that, Julie went away for good. When she was finally gone, that's when me and my sisters came clean to my parents about everything. How she yelled at us, struck us constantly. My parents can't really remember most of these events, as their memories aren't that great either. I'm pretty sure they felt absolutely terrible for us, having to go through all of this. We never heard or saw from Julie again. She just disappeared one day. I don't know if my parents ever confronted her about anything, but they definitely cut her out of our lives for good. They never contacted the police, though, as there wasn't really any proof of anything. It was all hearsay. Neither of my parents had ever caught her in the act. I wish they would have. I'm not sure why my sisters or myself never said anything sooner, like whenever Julie wasn't around. I vaguely remember that she made some threats that she would kill us if we did. I can't really remember. Years later, we found out she had been arrested and served time in jail. We never found out the exact reason why. Sometimes we all still talk about these events, and I know I'll remember this for the rest of my life. I just hope that Julie burns in hell one day. When I was 13 years old, it was the only time that I was ever sent to summer camp. All my friends from school went constantly, but the camp they frequented was too expensive for my parents. They managed to find a cheaper one that only lasted for 1 week. I got really excited about the idea, even though it wouldn't be my friend's summer camp. I thought about all the stories I could tell them once the new school year rolled around. It was tons of fun. The campsite was near a lake, so we had several waterside activities. I got real close to my cabin buddies. We were planning on pranking the boys, but we never got around to that part. On the third night of our stay, our head counselor took all of us out far past our curfew to sit around the campfire. We roasted marshmallows and the whole works, and then he asked if anyone knew a scary story. Almost all the boys lifted their hands, wanting to tell their own. First, the counselor pointed at each of them, and they began one by one. One boy told the story about a bear who sneaked into a cabin one night and snatched a kid away. Another told the tale about an old woman who was the founder of a campsite and had been killed by evil campgoers. That one was pretty intense. It was the head counselor's story that got stuck in my mind, though. It was about a man who lived very far away from the city, cut off from everybody because he saw every other person as a monster. He couldn't see people normally like the rest of us. He saw them as dangerous creatures who were out to get him. The only way to save himself was to take an axe and cut off each of the monster's limbs. Someone asked the head counselor if the man saw kids as monsters too, and of course he said yes. Others asked more questions, like where his house was, or if the guy had a disease in his eyes or something. The head counselor didn't have many answers for much, but he told us to remember that most scary stories told across campsites in almost every country have some basis in truth. He said our parents don't let us go out at night alone because evil people did exist and bad guys were real. We were all just captivated by what he said. I believe he was saying all those things because the boys had been sneaking out past curfew and getting into trouble out in the woods. He must have organized this little campfire experience to teach us a lesson in a way we would listen to. I thought it was quite a good idea, actually. I wasn't the kind to go out into the woods anyways, but we had been hoping to prank the boys past bedtime. When we returned, I talked to my cabin girls and we decided not to do it after all. We didn't want anyone to call our parents and ruin our fun time. We all just went to sleep, very tired because it was much later than our usual bedtime. Sometime later, though, I remember waking up suddenly. I could hear a noise outside. Now, this campsite had woods all around. They weren't that dense, but it was still possible for wildlife to be out there and hurt you. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but I felt like something had just walked past me. I opened my eyes and lifted my torso a bit to see the head counselor walking past our window outside. Why was he outside still? This is the strangest part. I remember the head counselor coming into our cabin, opening the door and flashing his light inside. The brightness didn't pass by me, so he must not have noticed that I was awake. I saw that he was holding something large in his other hand, though. I couldn't make it out, but it appeared to be a weapon of some sort. I saw his face despite the darkness, and his eyes were huge and manic-looking. He appeared to be very urgent to find something. He didn't find whatever it was, though, because he closed the door as quietly as possible and left. I don't know what he was doing or why he was doing that. The next day, when I asked the other girls, they had no idea what I was talking about. They had all been dead asleep. After the fire, I asked some boys if they had seen the counselor roaming around their cabin as well, but nobody else had seen him. In my mind, I came up with two theories. Either the head counselor was playing an elaborate prank after telling us the story of the axeman at the campfire, or I must have been dreaming because he told me that story or something. If it was a prank, though, it failed because everyone else was asleep. The memory of him coming into our cabin with his weapon is so vivid, though. I just can't bring myself to believe it was just a dream. So a few Saturdays ago now, I got a text from my little sister that went something like this. Hey bro, I'm gonna drive up to Granddad's for a few hours to check in on him. He's been pretty lonely because of the whole lockdown thing. I think we should pay him a visit. I know what you're thinking, and don't worry. He has that porch built so we can sit in his front garden while he sits inside, and we can just have a little chat. I'll bring some coffee and some cake for lunch. Are you up for joining me? I was snowed under with work, and it had bled into my weekend, so despite the fact I should have just stayed home, I knew I needed to get out of my apartment for a while. I agreed to join up with her. It was unusually nice weather out, even for a British summer. I thought, why not? Besides, I hadn't seen my granddad in 2 or 3 months at this point. I really missed him. As long as we kept from getting too close to him physically, I didn't see the harm in trying to pay him a visit. My sister arrived in her beat-up old Volkswagen Golf at around noon. We started the drive out to our granddad's. We were having our own little catch-up talks ranging from stuff around the virus to various YouTube channels we'd been binging. All was going pretty well. I was using my phone map app to help her navigate, so I had my eyes glued to the phone screen. Obviously, she was watching the road. She's a very chatty person, so I did think it was a bit unusual when she suddenly stopped talking altogether. This went on for a few minutes, but I didn't think it was anything to worry about too much. I figured she was just concentrating on the road. I only realized something was actually wrong when she said something like, "What's wrong with that car?" I looked up to ask which one she was talking about, but even as I caught a brief glance, it was very obvious what she was talking about. We were stopped at some traffic lights, and at the head of one of the lines of cars, I see this gray car with its entire back window blocked by all kinds of stuff. That's dangerous enough on its own, but it also sat there doing that peep and creep thing you can make a car do, from gently pressing on the clutch. At first, I just thought it was kind of funny. It seemed like they were trying to make their boring old dad car bounce up and down like some sort of Compton lowrider. I made a comment to my sister about why this is why Dad should put away their Dr. Dre 2001 records after they turn 40 or something. The light turns green and we start moving again. The gray Voxo at the head of the line just sat there though, not moving at all. This gave me a chance to get a look into the driver's front seat. I caught a glimpse of the driver. I don't know what I was expecting really. Maybe some white guy with wraparound shades lip-syncing expletives or something like that. Something relatively humorous, but instead what I saw was anything but amusing. This dude had shades on all right, but he was slumped over in the driver's seat with his head slopping off to one side. It was obvious he was very drunk. Not just I've had a few too many in the pub drunk. I mean, this fellow was absolutely bladed. So drunk he looked barely even conscious. We heard a few beeping horns. The people behind him were evidently very annoyed. He just sat there not paying attention to the lights at all. I honestly thought that since we'd gotten past him, that would be the end of it. But nope. We heard a massively aggressive revving engine noise as the man zoomed past us at like 100 miles an hour. He switched lanes so he was right in front of us, then he slammed his brakes immediately. I had to tell my sister to slow down so we could maintain a safe distance between us. He began swerving from side to side ahead of us as we passed on to a smaller road. It was so bad that cars coming from the other way were swerving and beeping their horns at him for fear of him slamming into them. It's not the scariest thing like a bloody vampire or a skinwalker or whatever, but I cannot overstate how scary it was to see such an oblivious and dangerous driver on the road right in front of you. He was acting completely unpredictable. He was swerving back and forth into oncoming traffic, slamming his brakes at any moment. I was worried that at some point it might be too late for us to stop ourselves before running into him. We made sure to keep quite a distance as the road opened up in front of us again into a full-on dual carriageway. He switched lanes yet again. He was so close to causing a bloody accident. Once again, he made it so he was on our right-hand side. We came up to another set of traffic lights. Don't look at him, just be cool, don't look into his car. I told my sister. She was doubly nervous as me. She was the one actually driving, and it was her car we were driving in. Here's the thing. My sister is a blonde, and she's quite pretty. She gets a lot of attention from guys sometimes, something that's always been stressful for her and for me. When I heard a banging sound, I looked over to see the dirty drunk driver banging on his window. I knew what was about to happen. I instinctively turned up our car's radio and reiterated for her to just ignore that car. There was a new concern now, though. Was he going to follow us? Follow us he did. As the lights turned green, the drunk driver kept level with us as we all started moving forward. He winded down his passenger window and started shouting over all the engines and traffic at us. Thank God for the car radio. We could only faintly hear the vulgar things he was saying. My sister was keeping her eyes on the road. I was staring the guy out at this point. I was scared, but I was also getting really angry. He was screaming at her, making disgusting gestures with his fingers and tongue. I was ashamed that another grown man could ever act like that. He was not paying attention to the road or his own driving either. I watched in absolute horror as he started drifting into us. Slowly but surely, his door was getting closer and closer to my sister's side of the car. He noticed me staring and switched his attention towards me. He became extremely aggressive. I could hear him clearly over the car radio even now, screaming through his window, stuff like, "What are you looking at?" along with other things like that. I don't think it would be appropriate to write it all out for polite company. I warned my sister to edge off to the side of the road, which she did. We were moving off the dual carriageway into a small offshoot road. She ended up slowing down and stopping behind the van of a dude who was working on an electrical box. The drunk driver followed us through and actually had to swerve hard to avoid smashing into the parked van. That caused even more beeping from the cars behind. He was pretty much forced to carry on off down the road, though. I was thanking God out loud that the dude wouldn't be able to follow us anymore. I turned to my sister to see if she was okay. She burst into tears, leaning her head onto the steering wheel and sobbing. I can't even blame her, though. She already finds driving stressful at the best of times, let alone with some drunk driver pervert trying to follow her. She was crying so loud, she drew the attention of that electrician fella. He came over to see what was wrong. The drunk driver had nearly just smashed into his car, so he was in a bit of a mood. I gave my sister pats on the back as I wound down my window and explained what was going on to the guy. This person had almost caused a serious accident through being drunk. When the electrician asked if I made a note of the guy's number plate, I was really kicking myself. I must have been so intensely scared of what might happen that it didn't even occur to me to record the guy's license plate number. I was at least consoled by the idea that surely someone else had the presence of mind to do what I'd neglected to do. I sincerely hoped that someone did. That fella shouldn't have been on the roads at all. I really hope he didn't cause an accident further on down the road. We ended up being late to our granddad's, but he didn't mind at all once we explained the situation. He was outraged just as much as we were. How could such a thing occur in the first place? Yeah, that's my story. I know it's not as scary as stalkers or monsters or anything like that, but I can't remember a time when something has had me literally shaking with adrenaline like that did. We all tend to feel safe while on the roads, to the point where some people find driving to be a boring experience, but it only takes one driver to remind us how vulnerable we all really are. So this happened a couple days ago. I live in the suburbs of Northern Carolina with my parents in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. My parents are away for their anniversary, so I've sort of had the place to myself for the week. I got home from a late shift at work around 1 a.m. I went inside, took a shower, then headed to the kitchen to make some buffalo wings for dinner. I cracked open a beer and plopped down in front of the TV. I was sifting through movies to watch on HBO Plus, when all of a sudden the doorbell rang. It actually startled me to the point that I jumped off the couch, knocking my beer over in the process. It was around 2 a.m. now. Obviously, there was no good reason for anyone to be at the door at this hour. I stared in the direction of the front door for several seconds before it rang again, followed by rapid knocking on the door and window. For whatever reason, I was no longer scared. I was more annoyed by the fact that some idiot would think this an appropriate time to be banging on someone's door. I headed over and unlocked the deadbolt. I pulled the front door open, leaving the chain in place. In the heat of the moment, I didn't even think to look out the window first. I just yanked the door right open. Standing on my front porch was a woman, around her mid-20s. She had long black hair, a purple hoodie, and black pants on. "Can I help you with something?" she responded. "Yeah, sorry to bother you so late, but my boyfriend and I are having some car trouble. Our phones are dead, so we were wondering if you could let us in to use yours." She pointed up the street to a dark-colored sedan, parked right underneath the street lamp. "See, that's our car right there." Now, had this been any other person, I would have said no, but the girl looked like a young college student. I live in a college town, and it's not uncommon for college kids to be out late on a weekend night. I asked her where her boyfriend was. She said he had walked to the gas station to see if anyone had a phone there. I pulled my iPhone out and told her to make a quick call, as I was about to head into bed. She thanked me and said she'd only take 2 seconds. She took my phone and dialed the number, then put the phone up to her ear. After a couple of rings, whoever she called picked up. "Yeah, it's me. I'm borrowing someone's phone." She stopped talking, and I could barely make out a man's voice on the other end. For some reason, I started to feel uneasy. She was taking a lot longer to be done with the phone call than I'd anticipated, and I was starting to get somewhat impatient. The whole time, she just kinda stood there staring at me with this wide-eyed expression. A creepy smile crept over her face as the person on the other end kept talking. Finally, she said okay bye and handed me my phone back. "Hey, do you think I might be able to come inside to use the bathroom for a second?" I said no and wished her good luck before slamming the front door. Just as I was about to walk away, I heard her begin maniacally laughing. She said, "You made the right choice." I looked out the peephole. She was still standing on my porch, but now a man had appeared from nowhere and was standing right next to her. He was wearing a hoodie and a face mask. The pair then started to circle around my home, banging on the windows and laughing raucously. I didn't hesitate to call 911 at this point. They stuck around for several minutes, even trying to get in through my back door. I grabbed my Glock 19 and aimed at the door with 911 on speaker. I was prepared to do whatever I had to if they broke in. They banged on my back door for around 5 minutes before they finally left. I watched them run up the street to that same black sedan I mentioned earlier and take off like a bat out of hell. The cops showed up a few minutes later and took a report. They told me I was the third person to call them that night, reporting this suspicious couple attempting to enter people's homes. I don't know what exactly they had planned, but I'm inclined to believe it was nothing so nice. Moral of the story is never answer the front door at night, especially without looking to see who it is first. I really learned my lesson that night. This July will mark the 6th wedding anniversary of my husband and I. I just want to say for the record that I'm incredibly happy. Marrying him was the best decision I ever made in my life. Now that I've said that though, I will say we almost never even made it to our wedding day because of a poor choice made by my then fiancé. Anybody who's ever gotten married knows it's an obnoxious amount of planning. Even weddings on a smaller scale can cost a lot of money and take many months of preparation. I was stressed out of my mind trying to plan this wedding. I told my fiancé just to worry about the photographer and I'd take care of basically everything else. I think it's also worth saying that I wanted it that way. I love the guy to death, but if it was up to him, we'd have some tacos and 80 music and nothing else. That may sound like a fun party, but for a wedding, not so sure. I gave him a list of great photographers I'd seen online or recommended to me by my coworkers and friends. All he had to do was pick one he liked from our budget, and everything else would be taken care of. One night, he came home from work excited, like he'd just won us the lottery. He told me he had been talking to a coworker of his, and the man suggested he knew someone he knows to be the photographer. The guy was well under our budget and shot weddings before. I didn't love the idea because I didn't see any portfolios or anything like that. I didn't even know if this guy actually had a camera. My fiancé assured me that he saw his work and that he'd done a good job. The only reason he wasn't listed anywhere online was because he did it as a side gig. He was just trying to make some extra money and eventually hopefully turn it into a career. I was instantly sketched out by the idea, but I trusted my man. My husband, then fiancé, has a great and horrible quality about him that allows him to always see the good in people, even if that's not such a good thing itself. Like I said, I wasn't too thrilled, but what's done is done. I guess the one positive was that we were saving quite a lot of money on this guy. Not far from the wedding, I still hadn't even met the guy yet. I was starting to get a little bit anxious. What if this guy didn't show up or something? I begged my fiancé to at least set up a meeting so I could meet the guy and discuss things with him. We met at the park where we were going to get married. This guy was just very strange. That might sound mean, but he just gave off that vibe. He was gross. Dirty, long, unclipped fingernails. He was missing some teeth in the front. I would guess he was at least 40 years old. Based on the way my fiancé had described him to me, I was picturing a young upstart, not some grizzled old guy. The man didn't say much and just kind of nodded along with whatever I said. I felt uncomfortable. It seemed like he was giving me quite strange looks. I tried to tell myself I was just imagining it because his appearance was a little bit off. I just couldn't shake that feeling though. He ended the meeting by showing me some pictures he had taken for his portfolio. I expected to see some wedding photos, but they were weird. They were some sort of strange artsy photos of dead animals and buildings on fire and things like that. He showed me some wedding photos at the end, and admittedly they were beautiful shots. That at least put me a little bit at ease. About a month away from the wedding, my girls and I went to Ocean City, Maryland for the bachelorette party. We rented a beautiful condo on the ocean and planned on spending the days on the beach and the nights partying in town. It was an amazing time until late Saturday afternoon. While we were on the beach, one of my friends said she could see some creepy guy seemingly taking photos of us. The guy was standing outside the building facing us. There was a lot of distance between the beach and the man, so I assumed he was just taking picturesque photos of the ocean or something. My friends couldn't relax though. Finally, one of them got up and said she was going to confront this guy just for some peace of mind. She and another friend walked all the way over to the man. I could see them talking, and after a moment, the man walked away. My friends walked back to us. She said that he was just taking pictures of the ocean. He even showed them to her. He apologized for freaking them out and said he would walk further down and take the pictures there. I smiled and said, "See, I told you." It wasn't until we were walking back that one of my friends said something that really freaked me out though. She said the photographer gave her a kind of creepy vibe, and that his fingernails were long, unclipped, and disgusting. Right away, I thought about our photographer for the wedding. I told myself it was just a coincidence, but the feeling in my gut said it was anything but. That night, we went to one of the local bars, and every time I saw someone take a picture, I felt my adrenaline kick in. The longer the night went, the more freaked out I became. I told the girls I wanted to go back to the condo, and when we got back, we decided to make some drinks there and just talk. Around 1 a.m., we heard a knock on the back door. We all looked at each other in disbelief. There was no way someone was knocking at this time, right? We weren't being loud enough to get a noise complaint or anything. We all huddled around the door. When we looked out, nobody was there. We thought that either some kids must be playing a joke on us, or we were all collectively going nuts. We decided to just go to bed. Not long after that moment, about 30 or 40 minutes later, I suddenly heard one of my friends begin screaming. She had been sleeping on the couch since we were one bedroom short. As we all rushed into the living room to see what was going on, there was some guy standing there with a camera. I was stunned at what I was seeing. It was my wedding photographer, standing there in the living room. Through all the chaos, he just kept saying, "I figured you guys would want some pictures of the memories. I'm just trying to take some pictures, so relax." One of my friends grabbed a knife from the kitchen and started to chase the man out of the condo. We immediately called the authorities and explained everything to them. The following day, we returned home, and I angrily recounted the incident to my fiancé. While I understand that he couldn't have known and it wasn't really his fault, I was a bit upset with him in the moment. The local police were informed, and before long, the man responsible was apprehended. His excuse was that he was merely attempting to take our pictures and didn't intend to frighten us or break in. Didn't hold up, fortunately. We managed to find another photographer in time for the wedding, and I realized that my fiancé wasn't really to blame. There's no way he could have known the guy was like that. My advice, though, to young couples planning weddings is to always ensure that you're familiar with the individuals you hire, because sometimes trying to save some money can turn out to be a very bad decision. This happened back in 2003. I used to work at a Walgreens, and if anybody doesn't know what that is, it's a popular pharmacy store chain that also sells a variety of other items. The stores are not that large usually, and generally are never too busy either. Most of the time, there's a pretty calm feeling inside. The store that I worked at used to be open 24 hours. I'm not sure if it still is, but I know that it was when I worked there. Usually, I was the one working overnights. I would be all by myself for most of my shift. There wasn't really a need to have anybody else there anyway, because I could handle everything, and we never got many overnight customers. I was also able to walk to and from work, which was a nice arrangement. I had an apartment that was just down the street and a couple blocks over, so it would only take me 10 minutes there and back. Usually, I worked 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and it wasn't that late yet when I walked into work. It wasn't too early when I walked back home. One time when I was working an overnight shift, everything was going as normal. It was about 1 a.m., I believe. I remember I heard the automatic doors opening and glanced over to see a woman entering the store. She appeared to be about 40 years old and had dark brown hair. She was maybe 5'2" or 5'3" and pretty thin. After entering, the woman looked in my direction and said hello to me. I said hi back to her and she walked down one of the aisles. I focused my attention elsewhere. I was just standing behind the counter at the checkout. We only had 2 checkout lanes, but most of the time only one was open. Several minutes went by, and I occasionally saw the woman passing. I wasn't watching her or anything though. She just seemed to be a perfectly normal woman doing some shopping. At one point, I just happened to casually be looking around, when I caught the woman standing half behind an aisle, holding a small video camera. She was holding it in such a way that it looked like she was filming me or taking my photo or something. I looked over at her, wondering what was going on. It was like she was kind of trying to hide it too. She was about halfway obscured. I guess she thought I couldn't see her. I found this really strange. After a couple seconds of this, her camera went down and she disappeared fully into the aisle. I did think it was a bit odd, but not really the biggest deal. About a minute later, the woman walked up to the left near the exits. She said goodnight to me and walked out without even buying anything. I said goodnight to her too, but I was a little weirded out by the entire experience. After she was gone, I quickly forgot about it though. I mean, yeah, it was strange that she was filming me for some reason, but it wasn't the worst thing in the world. Hours went by and several more customers came in. All of them were pretty normal. When 6 a.m. arrived, I was off. Another coworker arrived, so I left Walgreens and headed back to my apartment. I was walking along the sidewalk, and it was still pretty dark out. Things were very quiet. Only the occasional car passing by me on the road was making any sound. As I was walking back, though, I started to hear something a little bit different. I could hear somebody walking a ways behind me. There were footsteps a good distance away. I was curious, but I didn't look back yet. I crossed over 1 block, and as I did, I glanced over. I saw the same woman was walking behind me. I found this really strange. After I crossed the street, I crossed another, and then went along that sidewalk. That would take me all the way back to my apartment, with no more turns needed. I didn't think the woman would follow me still, but she did. That's when I started to really get creeped out. Her whole personality just seemed kind of mysterious. Even when she had spoken to me, she'd only said hi and bye really. The woman continued to walk behind me. She was a fair ways back. Soon I reached my apartment. I was really glad to see she hadn't seemed to gain on me or anything. She was about the same distance behind me. Now, you had to use your key to enter my apartment building. I had a separate key for my unit as well. This made me feel better. If I could just get inside, there was no way she'd be able to follow me. I knew for sure she didn't live here. I entered my building and went up to my apartment, which was on the 2nd floor. My apartment was at the front side of the building, so I could look out onto the street where the woman had been walking. After I got inside, I went to the window. I looked out and saw the woman standing there on the sidewalk. She already had her camera out again and appeared to be taking a video of me at my window. This was all so strange. I ducked down to get out of her sight. She was just taking a video of my apartment window. What was the point? How did she even know it was mine? After several minutes, I looked again, and she was gone. I went on with my normal routine after that. I would usually relax after work, then eventually fall asleep. Obviously, my hours of being awake were very different from most people, with me having to work overnight hours. I fell asleep at around 9 in the morning or so. When I woke up, it was almost 2 p.m. That was a little bit earlier than I usually woke up. I could hear the sound of somebody trying to open my apartment door. I walked over and looked through the peephole to see what was going on. What I saw was that very same woman walking away from my door. I just barely saw her, but I knew for sure it was the same person from before. I was now extremely creeped out by this. After she left, I didn't really know what to do. I watched her leave the building and walk away down the sidewalk rather quickly. I don't know how she even got inside. She'd probably snuck in as someone else was leaving, which was very possible. I decided to call the police and tell them everything. They came out to investigate, and I gave them all the information I could. I didn't really know what else to do. They said they would look into it, but after that I never heard anything more. I also never saw that woman again. It still creeps me out when I think about it. Obviously, I don't work at that same Walgreens anymore, and I haven't for many years now. I also don't live in that apartment or even the same city anymore. I still wonder what that woman was doing though. Why was she recording me? Why did she follow me? Why did she attempt to break into my apartment? Wedding season is always a lucrative time of the year for me. I work for some fancy reception hall that hosts weddings pretty much every Friday and Saturday, from May until October. Some events are very fun and awesome, and others are horrible. Since the company is small and family-owned, they try to do everything themselves. Whenever it was becoming too much, they hired me. I'm basically a glorified handyman. I help set up the weddings, help assist with the wiring, and most importantly, I'm the guy who stays late and cleans everything up after. Especially on Friday nights, since Saturday another wedding will be taking place right after. I always like weddings that are small and quiet, because I'm not spending hours cleaning up the place after. Those folks tend to be a bit more reserved. In the story I'm about to tell you, it was the exact opposite. It was a gigantic wedding. Hundreds of people were there. We were at max capacity. As the night progressed, I could see the people getting more and more drunk and rambunctious. I was trying to clean and pick up in the background, while everyone was dancing and having a good time. There was only so much I could do, though, with a building full of people. I decided to take a long break and rest my eyes for a while everyone was still out having their fun at the wedding. I woke up 45 minutes later, and I noticed that the time the wedding would be ending was about 20 minutes or so from now. I could get started on my cleanup work once again. I grabbed my headphones and made my way from the parking lot to the building. As I made the long walk back up the hill, I was disgusted right away when outside it looked like a music festival had just come through. There was trash and empty bottles everywhere. I even saw a girl passed out in the middle of the grass. I went inside and the band was still playing. The inside was just as bad as the outside. Tables and chairs had been flipped over, bottles and cans were everywhere, even plates and napkins littered all over the floor. I was kind of angry, honestly. My bosses, the couple that owned the place, came up to me before the end of the wedding and apologized. They told me if I did a good job tonight, they would pay me extra, and I could take the next Friday off. Well, that seemed like a pretty fair trade-off to me. It took forever, but they finally started to empty out. They hired a bus to transport all these people wherever they were going, because these people were obviously in no position to be driving. They'd only rented 2 small party buses though, so they'd have to make multiple trips to pick everyone up. I was trying to grab up the tables and chairs, but because some people were still left behind waiting, they were throwing things and being inconsiderate. An hour and a half after the official ending time of the wedding itself, everyone was finally gone. My bosses had gone home for the evening. This was the time of night I didn't mind being alone, though. My headphones in, working away, it was so peaceful for me. Since I knew I was going to be there a long time picking up after this party, I really needed that peaceful time to wind down too. I started from the outside and went side to side picking up trash and fixing all the furniture. That took quite a while. I then went inside and started working on the inside. It was getting cold outside, so I shut the door and continued on my work. A while later, my wireless headphones died. I figured I would just use the speaker from my phone, since nobody was around anyway. When I placed the phone on one of the tables, though, I noticed something quite strange. The door to the venue was now wide open, and I'd just shut it closed. I went over and called out to see if anyone was there. Of course, I heard nothing back. It was quite windy out, so I didn't think it was that outlandish an idea that maybe the wind had knocked it open. I hadn't locked it after all. It had never happened before, but it didn't mean it was impossible. I made some trips back and forth from the main hall to the kitchen. I was just about done for the night when I noticed the door I'd closed was now open once again. Now I felt uncomfortable. Maybe the owner was still around and I was being stupid and didn't realize it? I called out the owner's name several times, but I heard nothing back. I'm not an easily spooked guy, so my rational brain was telling me everything was still fine. All I needed to do was finish up and lock the door, then I'd be out of here. That's exactly what I did. I finished up, locked the door, and started walking to my car. When I was only about 30 to 40 feet away from the building, I saw the reflection of the lights in the glass. I stopped on a dime. I had just turned all the lights off. I turned around and saw they were shining brightly through the windows. I ran back, unlocked the door, and standing in the middle of the room was a man. He had suit pants on and a white buttoned-up shirt. Strangely, he wasn't wearing any shoes or socks. I could see right away that something about this guy was not right. His eyes were half open, and even though he wasn't moving, he was swaying back and forth, mumbling something to himself. I asked him if he was okay, and he started getting really agitated. "Where's my jacket? I want my jacket!" Clearly, this man had had too much to drink and seemed to have been left behind. I tried to be civil and told the guy to relax a bit. I'd help him out and find his jacket. I put my head down for a second to call the owner. At that moment, I had my head down. I heard his feet pounding hard on the ground. I looked up and he was running in the opposite direction. He ran into the kitchen screaming incoherently. I called the owner and told him what was going on. He said he would be right down since he only lived about 100 yards away. While I was talking to the owner on the phone, I described the man, so the owner could try and contact someone from the wedding. He called the best man since we had his contact information, as well as the bride and groom. They were still awake, luckily, but when my boss told them about the guy and described his appearance, they all said they didn't recognize him. There were so many people that it was possible he had been left behind, though. I was waiting for my boss to come back to the venue, and I decided to go into the kitchen and try and communicate with this guy. I turned the lights on and heard the scampering of bare feet on the ground again. I turned just in time to see the man lunging at me with a steak knife. It was in that brief moment I was able to block the swing and get away with just a shallow cut. I immediately backed out of the kitchen and slammed the door. This all happened in just a matter of seconds. My heart was racing now. I could hear the man jabbing his knife into the door on the other side. All I could do was sit there and try and hold it shut. At that moment, my boss walked in. I immediately yelled at him to call the police right now. I was stuttering my way through what was happening as I held that door shut. The man in the kitchen was screaming and stabbing the knife against the door over and over. He wasn't saying anything of substance really, other than occasionally mentioning his mysterious jacket. Thank God the police finally showed up and apprehended the man. He seemed confused as to why he was being arrested. The wedding party was contacted the next day, and to our horror, apparently nobody recognized the guy. He had not been invited to the wedding. When they finally got the pictures developed and scoured through every photo, they didn't find any pictures of this man. That is, except for one single picture toward the end of the night. It showed a group of men and women smoking cigars around a small bonfire outside, and in the background you can just see the guy walking up the hill toward the venue from out of the woods. It was blurry, but it was very clearly that guy. We have no idea where that guy came from or what his ultimate intentions were. From what I was told by my boss, he may have just been a crazy person. Maybe, though, he was just some drunk trying to crash a wedding for some free booze. We have no idea. Ever since that night, though, I don't wear my headphones so I can hear my surroundings, and I always lock the door every time I go in and out. I've worked with some crazy people in the food service industry, but no one can compete with the guy I'm about to tell you about. I've been working at this specific Mexican place for a little over 2 years now. One day, one of our employees quit quite out of nowhere, so we hired someone pretty fast. It probably would have been better to get someone with a little more experience, but I was also involved in the hiring process, and this guy seemed perfectly fine. We needed someone quickly, and we only had one applicant. He started his shift the Saturday after his interview, and because it was so busy during the lunch rush, we had him doing dishes. There was no time to train him to cook that day. This may seem weird to other people who work in a restaurant as well, but at ours we didn't have someone who only does the dishes or only cooks or whatever. We would all help out with any task whenever anyone had a free moment. The only problem with this was this new guy David absolutely despised doing the dishes for some reason. I get it, it's not exactly fun and no one loves that part of a job, but he made sure to let everyone know just how furious it made him. He'd stand in the back doing dishes and slam them down in the sink or throw them into the shelves. It was to the point where the noise actually started to scare the customers. He was asked to stop and did so for around 30 minutes, then went back to throwing dishes around and screaming and cussing about how bad his life was. It was incredibly cringy, but we needed his help, so we couldn't afford to fire him. This particular day, I decided to sit outside and eat my lunch. I was sitting facing the parking lot. I don't think David had realized that I was sitting outside, because he went out to take a smoke break. He opened the front door of the restaurant and slammed it closed behind him, then made a gun shape with his hand and shoved it in his mouth, acted like he was shooting himself in the head. On his way back to his car, he started yelling into the open air about how much he hated this place and everyone in it. My mouth was just hanging wide open. I was witnessing a grown adult throwing a tantrum like he was a big baby. It only got worse from there. His car was facing directly where I was sitting. I got to watch him as he got inside. He slammed the door closed and proceeded to scream and thrash around, banging his head on the steering wheel and slapping himself in the face for 3 minutes straight. The worst part is, I'm not even exaggerating at all. I could tell this guy was nuts. I felt like he must have been on something. I went inside and told my coworkers about what I'd seen. One of them said they weren't even surprised. I was confused and asked her why. She said she had worked with him at another restaurant years earlier, and he had been fired for some sort of behavior. That I should be careful and do what I could to avoid being with him. In the meantime, it was very concerning. I went to the owner, who basically said, "It is what it is, and if he's not hurting anyone, he can't be fired." I think his exact words were, "We all have bad days." Well, this was worse than a bad day, though. It ended up being a horrible and disgusting 2 months working with this man. He started training to be a line cook about 2 weeks after he started working with us. I thought that was kind of gross, considering he had some of the worst hygiene I'd ever seen. He reeked of cigarettes, had long hair, and had disgusting long and dirty fingernails that just seemed to get worse as the days went by. It was so bad his nails would pop through his gloves and drop dirt constantly. He didn't even care. He would only change them when someone else noticed. The things I mentioned so far might not seem that bad, but what he did next brought it to a whole new level. I got this feeling he started to feel like he could do anything he wanted and wouldn't get fired, since he'd gotten away with so much up to that point. We didn't have a large staff, so he was left alone to cook sometimes. That's when we started getting a lot of complaints about the food. People would find hairs or tell us their food didn't taste right. We had one guy tell us he was 100% positive there was someone spitting in his beans. Let me tell you, I could really see it. We were lucky to talk him out of calling the police, and instead gave him a voucher for free food for 6 months. We decided it would be best not to leave David alone in the kitchen anymore. That really seemed to upset him. He wasn't a team player at all. My manager was given the okay by our owner to do whatever it took to make him quit. Basically, just make his life miserable. We could have had him fired, but I guess there's more paperwork involved when you fire someone. David was told to do dishes all day, spray out the trash cans, clean the grease traps, scrub the floors, basically all the stuff no one else wanted to do. I thought he was creepy and scary enough already, but the second we started giving him jobs he didn't want to do, he became almost evil. I'd bring him dishes and he'd start screaming at me and even making fun of the way I looked. I really didn't understand the hostility, but whatever. I stopped interacting with him at all at one point. It became obvious when any of my coworkers had been talking to him because they would come back in tears. The guy was ruthless. The last day he ever worked with us, he did something so gross, we ended up having to call the police on him. He had cooked that day because one of the other cooks had called out. I was standing in front of the restaurant when he walked in and noticed him holding a water bottle behind his back filled with a yellow substance. I figured it was Gatorade or he had a drink powder in it or something. He went back and washed his hands, which was a shocker in and of itself. He usually had to be told to do that. I didn't see his water bottle anywhere after that. The day went on, and for dinner we had a special that was a broth-based soup. I was waiting tables and was confused when literally anyone who ordered the soup complained it tasted terrible. I told the manager who tried the soup as well. They agreed. Only when he said, "This tastes like piss," did I put two and two together. I started screaming, "Oh my God," over and over again. I didn't even know what to do. Everyone was asking me what I was freaking out about. I looked over at David, and he looked at me with wide eyes. He mouthed the word no. They looked over at him. When they saw my eyes dart over to him, that's when he decided to make a break for it. The only problem was the way out of the kitchen was directly through all of us. He lunged forward, and my manager threw him to the ground. I was able to tell them what I'd seen. There was zero hesitation. We called the police immediately. They arrived and found the bottle he'd brought in. It was indeed filled with his urine. He was arrested, and the soup was tested as well. Unfortunately, it was tainted with his bodily fluids, not just urine either. The restaurant was closed for a while after that. I quit before it even reopened. I decided an office job was much more suitable for me than this. David was charged with tampering of consumer products and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. I was glad that he actually got some prison time. Honestly, I think he deserves it. Hopefully, when he gets out, he's not someone I have to encounter ever again. This freaky story happened to me a few years back, when my wife was still my girlfriend. We decided to make an impromptu camping trip. I'd never camped much, other than a few times with a friend of mine. My girlfriend used to camp all the time with her family when she was younger though, and she really wanted to do it again. She thought it would be a great chance for she and I to spend some time together, away from all the noise of the city that she and I lived in at the time. She went all out and bought a bunch of awesome camping stuff. Amongst the items she bought was a nice new tent. It was a bigger tent, especially for 2 people, but I never minded more room. That was always okay with me since I was a bigger guy. At the time of this story, one thing I really liked about this tent, which I found out later on that most tents actually have, was that it had a little window thing on it, so you could see what was outside. At night, I knew it was going to be dark, but just the ability to be able to see and have the light shine in on us in the morning was a comforting thought for me. We arrived at the desolate camping location in the afternoon. We were only staying 2 nights, so we wanted to make the best of the trip. That first afternoon, we didn't really do much, just kind of chilled, set up the tent, and went to bed early. I was loving my little window. I was able to stare around outside with it while I was laying in my sleeping bag, and because of where the tent was located, I was able to see a good view of the night sky. It was beautiful. Just as I expected, the light blasted through the window in the morning. It was almost like waking up in my own bed. We got out of bed early that day and really made the most of it. We went fishing, hiking. We were also able to spend a considerable amount of time laying around relaxing and enjoying each other's company. We were on track to having another early night. I was alright with that though. Neither one of us has ever been a night owl. We were beat from everything we'd done earlier in the day. We got all cozy in the tent and I made sure I propped my window screen open. While I was starting to drift off, I thought I'd noticed something outside. It kind of looked like movement, but I didn't know if I'd dozed off for a second or if I was really seeing something out there. I sat up, and before I could get a good look, my girlfriend said, "Did you see that too?" I told her I thought I'd seen something, but I wasn't sure. We both stared out our little tent window. It just looked like a peaceful night. My girlfriend gasped. It sounded like air had been sucked out of her. To this day, I've never seen the expression she had in that moment. Sitting on a tree branch about 30 to 40 feet away was a person. They were wearing one of those weird fake president masks, and while sitting in the tree, they were sort of kicking their feet back and forth like a child on the swing would do. We both just sat there like sitting ducks. I was terrified because we hadn't seen one single other person the entire time we'd been out here. All of a sudden, there was a creep with a mask so close to us. I felt like crying, but I was trying to be brave since my girlfriend was already in tears. I knew the person wasn't directly doing anything to us, but the unsettling nature of the situation made us uncomfortable. We watched the guy for about 5 minutes, just sitting there in his tree, tilting his head back and forth as he observed us. He then jumped down. The person didn't approach the tent, but that feeling they were going to rush us at any second never went away. It felt like forever that the person was just pacing around outside our tent. Then they just stopped and didn't move. He didn't sway, he just stood still like a statue. A couple minutes later, the person turned to face the tent head on. We could hear them laughing under the mask. The person started to wave right at us, even with the mask on. It felt like the person was staring directly at me. The wave wasn't like a little friendly wave. The person was erratically waving their hand back and forth like they were trying to rip their own arm off or something. The person stopped waving abruptly, did a strange twitch, and then stood stock still. In a muffled voice we could barely hear, he called out to us, Hey guys, bye guys." He then literally ran full speed off into the woods. We just sat there and continued staring out the window all night long. We both may have dozed off at different points, but we mostly stayed awake the entire time. The guy in the mask never did come back. There was no evidence of where he'd come from. That was the most disturbing part. Whoever this was knew that we were there, and we had no idea how long he'd been out there watching us. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. He could have been out there following us for days for all we knew. I guess all things considered, we were lucky since he didn't do anything to us. Even though we were physically unharmed though, mentally this still left us messed up for a while. We're still thinking about it to this day. We've gone camping several times since that night, but from now on we'll only stay in a cabin with doors we can lock. This happened when I was driving to work very early one morning. It was probably a little bit after 5 a.m. or so, and very dark and quiet outside. I enjoyed driving to work this early because there was hardly anybody else out. It made driving very easy. I worked about 15 minutes from my house. I don't really take any major highways to get there though. It's mostly a trip down quieter roads. After leaving, I drove the first 10 minutes no problem. As I was driving down a quiet back road which would go all the way to my work, I saw a guy riding on a bike up ahead. He was riding sort of on the side of the road. This road had 2 lanes, one going in each direction, and not much of a shoulder or anything like that. The guy on the bike was sort of on the line. I was planning to go into the oncoming traffic lane to pass him by, because nobody else was out here driving at this time or anything. There wasn't a single other car in sight. As I got closer to this man riding the bike though, he moved to the left and now was riding right in the middle of the street. I slowed down, and when I got closer, the man moved over even more to block me. He kinda started swerving all over the place. I wasn't quite sure what he was doing. It all seemed quite controlled though. It wasn't like this guy didn't know how to ride a bike or was drunk or something. He was clearly swerving around trying to block me from proceeding. I was now going about the same speed as he was, very slow. I moved over to the other lane and he moved over as well. He was just going back and forth between them, completely cutting me off. There was no way I could safely pass him by. All I could do was drive slowly behind him and wait for him to move out of the way. Either he had no idea I was there, or he was really intent on making me stop. After following him at a snail's pace for 2 or 3 minutes, I finally honked at the guy. He was going to make me late for work, and I couldn't take this anymore. After honking, he still didn't move. He remained right in the middle of the road. Actually, he gave me the middle finger. He didn't turn around, just stuck his hand up in the air. Clearly, he knew I was back there, and I wanted to get around him. I guessed that he was just trying to be a jerk for no reason. I continued behind him for another minute or so. There was a stop sign up ahead, and an intersection. I would have the option to turn right, and I took it. I wasn't sure where this route would go exactly, but I was pretty sure I could still get to work this way. After turning right, I took a left. I figured if I found another road going left, I could reconnect with the original one, and I would most certainly be ahead of this guy on the bike. As I drove for a few minutes, I was able to connect back with the road like I had planned. When I did, I was a little ways ahead of the biking man. I could see him behind me in my mirrors. I drove on this road for less than a minute before my workplace was up on the right side. I turned into the parking lot and parked my car. Luckily, I had just made it and was not late. Right after I parked, I saw the biker go by on the street. He looked at me the entire time, but didn't do anything. I went inside to work. The workday went on as normal. I don't leave the building at all when I'm there. Hours later, when I was leaving for the day, I walked out to see my car was all scratched up. It appeared as though somebody had keyed it. I thought I knew exactly who it was. It had to be that guy on the bike. For whatever reason, he seemed to be really trying to make me mad. I couldn't believe this. Unfortunately, there was not much I could do. There were no security cameras in the parking lot, and nobody saw him do it, so sadly I had no proof. I also had no idea who this guy was. I got my car fixed, and after that I didn't see that biker again. I don't work that job anymore, but whenever I think about it, I think about that mad biker. I used to work in a small convenience store in the city. It wasn't quite downtown, but was pretty close. There would be lots of people walking down the sidewalk during the day, and at night there would still be a decent amount of people out, especially after the bars closed nearby. Our store was open 24 hours. It was pretty small, but loaded with all kinds of snacks and drinks and things like that. There were probably 5 aisles, and then I would be behind the counter at the far end of the store, right near the doors. I worked at the shop for several months, and usually worked overnights. Sometimes it would be pretty busy, other times it would be really quiet. You never really knew which it would be. It depended on a lot of different things. Between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., those were generally the quietest times. I was working and by myself on a typical night. It was a little bit after 3 a.m. and the store was empty. Occasionally, I would look out the window to the street and see it was quite dead. I was just sitting there behind the counter, going on my phone and looking through some things. Pretty soon, I heard the door open and saw a woman walking in. She entered the store and walked down one of the first aisles. Several minutes went by and she seemed to be just shopping around like a normal person. Eventually, when she came up to the counter, she put several items down. When I started to scan them in, she told me she only had $3 and asked me if I could give her a deal. I don't remember exactly what she was buying, but I remember it added up to around $15 total. I told her I couldn't do that. Obviously, she would have to put some things back. I said she would only be able to get things that added up to $3. It seemed like common math to me. The woman immediately got angry though, and said she wasn't going to pay for anything. I told her to leave then, and she stormed out of the store in anger. Every now and then, customers would be rude or try to get free stuff. I mean, being in the city in the middle of the night, all kinds of people would come in. I was somewhat used to less than ideal customers and thought that I knew how to deal with them. Around 20 to 30 minutes went by, and no more customers came in during that time. Then the door opened, and I saw the woman come back. Behind her was a man this time. This guy was 6'5" and had long stringy hair and a goatee. I'm assuming he must have been the woman's husband or boyfriend or something. He walked right up to me looking all angry and accused me of being rude. The guy started cursing me out and didn't even give me a chance to talk. I could smell the alcohol in his breath as he verbally ripped into me. The woman was just standing back a few feet and adding in a few words of insults here and there. I remembered that after them yelling at me for like a minute straight, the man wanted to, quote, take it outside with me. I told them both to get the hell out of my store before I called the cops on them. That's when the guy suddenly shoved me backwards from over the counter. I wasn't ready for it, and to be honest, he was a strong dude. I fell back and got knocked over. When I got up, I saw the man was right up at the counter, wanting to fight me. I moved over to the right. We had an alarm back there, so I pulled it. It was very loud, and the sound filled the entire store. The guy backed away from the counter and grabbed a bunch of random things on the shelf, then threw them at me. He knocked over a stand of drinks as well. He went to an aisle and started grabbing more things off the shelves. He stuffed them into his pockets. The woman at the same time grabbed some other stuff. Then they both left, stealing a bunch of random things. The police got there several minutes later. The man and woman were long gone, though. The only thing I could do was give a description and my account of what happened. Luckily, neither of them came back while I was working again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.